The air in the Athenian workshop of Sophroniscus was thick with the scent of olive oil and marble dust. Young Socrates, tall and already possessing the unusual piercing gaze he would become known for, worked his chisel with mechanical precision. He was an artist by trade, but a philosopher by instinct, constantly feeling the friction between the tangible form in his hands and the perfect abstract forms in his mind. The path of his life, however, was violently altered by his father's final, most peculiar commission, a sacred sculpture for a hidden, heavily guarded crypt beneath the temple of Demeter, a place whispered to hold the city's oldest secrets. Sophroniscus, weakened by a sudden fever, could not complete the piece. The responsibility fell to Socrates, who, masked and blindfolded by the priests, was led into the deep, echoing catacombs. When the blindfold was removed, he was not greeted by an altar, but by a half-finished work bathed in the eerie glow of an oil lamp. It was not Zeus nor Poseidon, but an unfinished male figure, a masterpiece of human anatomy, yet critically lacking a head. The figure was perfect in its musculature and posture, a body searching for a mind. The temple's ancient solemn high priest, Thrasyllos, stood guard. He revealed the secret. Sophroniscus had been tasked not with creating a god, but with answering the impossible question, what is the perfect man? Socrates spent weeks in the crypt. The isolation and the intense focus on the headless form became a grueling initiation. He felt the weight of the city's unquestioned beliefs pressing down on him. He realized that the true perfection his father sought wasn't physical, it was metaphysical. He put down his chisel, unable to finish the statue, for to give it a head would be to limit its potential, to claim he knew the answer to the ultimate question. Thrasyllos, witnessing this profound moment of philosophical submission, recognized Socrates' unique destiny. As a reward, he revealed a greater secret, a hidden parchment written in archaic script tucked away inside a niche. It was a fragment of a lost Pythagorean text, arguing that the wisdom of self-knowledge was superior to all mathematical and cosmic certainties. The text urged, "Do not measure the stars, measure the spirit." This encounter was Socrates' baptism. He was given a mission not by an army, but by a hidden truth. As he finally emerged, blinking into the Athenian sun, Thrasyllos offered a final cryptic warning. The city will forgive you for leaving the marble unfinished, but never for leaving their beliefs unfinished. Your questions are an attack on their foundations. Guard your doubts well. Socrates returned home, locking his sculptor tools in a chest. He understood his destiny was to search not for beauty in stone, but for virtue in the soul, beginning with the difficult work of admitting ignorance. The unfinished statue remained in the crypt, a symbol of the lifelong search for the perfect thinking man. The Peloponnesian War was an inferno that consumed Athenian life, and Socrates has found himself, despite his growing philosophical preoccupations, serving as a dedicated hoplite. He was not a man of natural grace, but he possessed an unnerving physical hardiness and an unflappable calmness that unnerved his peers more than any Spartan charge. His courage was most notable during the brutal siege of Potidæa. The extended siege quickly turned into a war of attrition, marked by mounting disease and desperation. The adventure here begins with a chilling discovery. Socrates, recognized as highly reliable, is tasked with inventorying military dispatches and notices a discrepancy. a series of seemingly innocuous orders regarding troop rotation on the weakest, most exposed northern flank have been removed from the main ledger. He suspects this is not an error, but a calculated act of betrayal. Socrates' investigation leads him to the tent of Callias, a high-ranking aristocratic commander known for his oligarchic sympathies. Through subtle questioning, Socrates realizes the horrifying truth. Callias is deliberately funneling democratic soldiers, the poor and middle classes, to the most dangerous, unsustainable parts of the front. The siege is being used as a politically advantageous bloodletting, a subtle way to purge the populist element from Athens, weakening the democratic structure back home. Socrates confronts a catastrophic ethical dilemma. To expose Callias would be mutiny, instantly punishable by death and perhaps causing a catastrophic division among the troops. To remain silent is to be complicit in the murder of his fellow citizens. He confides only in a handful of trusted men, including a young and ambitious Alcibiades, whose life Socrates saves later in battle, cementing the younger man's admiration. They manage to intercept Callias's communication line and find a coded dispatch confirming the systematic sacrifice of the lower-ranking troops. Instead of causing a rebellion, Socrates devises a brilliant, subtle countermove. He uses his own physical endurance to lead a series of highly publicized, grueling supply runs to the exposed northern flank. His very presence, his reputation for unflappable virtue, and his philosophical questions about the commander's true duty begin to make the other officers uneasy about the situation on that specific flank. The pressure works. Fearing exposure, Callias discreetly orders a strategic realignment of the troops, minimizing the pre-planned losses. He is later recalled to Athens for an unrelated insubordination. Socrates has prevented a political massacre without violating the letter of military law. He learned that true moral action often requires silent strategic defiance, not grandstanding. As the war drags on, Socrates leaves the front a hero, a title he dismisses, knowing the true war is being fought not for land, but for the soul of the city. His resolve solidifies. The only weapon he needs is the persistent question. The pronouncement from the oracle at Delphi was intended as a celestial honor, but for Socrates, it was an existential attack. When his devoted friend Chaerephon returned with the bewildering news that no man is wiser than Socrates, the philosopher felt the entire weight of the world's ignorance settle upon his shoulders. He was certain of only one thing: he knew nothing. If the god of prophecy said he was the wisest, then the statement must be a riddle, a dangerous one. Socrates undertook a demanding, solitary journey to Delphi, determined to disprove the god and uncover the hidden meaning of the prophecy. His trek was turned into a gauntlet by his burgeoning rivals, the Sophists, led by their most cunning practitioner, Protagoras. At every major stop, a roadside shrine, a bustling inn, a river crossing, Socrates was ambushed by Sophist acolytes. They didn't use violence. They used rhetorical traps, complex paradoxes, swift-moving arguments designed to humiliate him publicly and demonstrate the oracle's folly. Socrates met each challenge not with counter-argument, but with simple, foundational questions, the earliest recorded use of his Maieutic or midwife method. Before we discuss what is the whole truth, tell me, my young friend, what is a half-truth? By exposing the shaky foundations of their bombastic claims, he defeated them not by superior knowledge, but by demonstrating their claim to knowledge, was empty. Upon reaching Delphi, Socrates refused the intermediaries. He forced an audience with the Pythia, who, usually speaking in incomprehensible mumbles, stared directly at Socrates. She spoke in a clear, exhausted voice. "The god does not lie, but the god does not flatter. The prophecy is not an honor, Socrates. It is an assignment. You are the wisest, because you are the only man in Athens who understands the limit of his own knowledge. Your destiny is to expose the ignorance of those who claim authority over the city." Socrates understood. The wisest man was the man who knew how much he did not know. His life's work would now be dedicated to testing the prophecy, not by seeking wisdom, but by unmasking its pretenders, politicians, poets, and craftsmen. It was a search for negative proof, an inherently confrontational mission. The Pythia offered a final terrifying caution. You seek to disarm the minds of Athens, but men cling to their false knowledge as they cling to life. You will be accused of impiety, for there is no greater god to the powerful than their own self-certainty. Socrates left Delphi knowing that the oracle had sentenced him not to a life of serene contemplation, but to a public intellectual martyrdom, a destiny he embraced. The agora became Socrates' schoolroom, his stage, and his battlefield. With his eccentric appearance and magnetic, yet challenging presence, he drew the intellectual elite of Athenian youth, most notably Plato. While his public debates were well documented, his most dangerous and profound inquiries took place in a clandestine discussion circle, a small, windowless chamber in the forgotten Kerameikos district. Here, the dialogues were not casual. They were intense, high-stakes investigations into the very nature of truth and power. The Sophists, led by the furious Thrasymachus, recognized the existential threat posed by these conversations. They saw the corruption not in Socrates' ideas, but in his method, the relentless questioning that destroyed their lucrative business of selling wisdom. The adventure focuses on the Sophists' successful infiltration of the secret circle. Thrasymachus dispatched two highly trained students of rhetoric, fluent in dialectical espionage, to plant themselves within Socrates' inner circle. Their objective was simple: force Socrates to make a concrete, actionable statement against the law or the state's governance, which they would record and use as incriminating evidence. One stormy evening, the circle was debating the relationship between the citizen and the law. The sophist spies pushed Socrates hard on the necessity of blind obedience. Socrates, perceiving their intent through his characteristic scrutiny, turned the tables. He shifted the focus from the state to the individual. Socrates: "You ask if one must obey a law, but I ask, must a good man obey a wicked law? Obedience to wickedness is itself a wicked act. The moral duty of a citizen is not passive compliance, but active inquiry into the justice of the decree." The spies frantically tried to record this, but Socrates had deliberately used language that was philosophically challenging, yet legally ambiguous. He was advocating for individual conscience, not insurrection. His method was his best defense. He could not be pinned down by a simple phrase. Suddenly, Thrasymachus himself and a handful of his acolytes burst into the chamber, attempting to seize the notes. Chaos erupted. Socrates, despite his advanced age, used his presence and voice to subdue the situation. He did not fight, but commanded, "Gentlemen, you seek to seize my words, but you cannot seize my thoughts."
What is true remains true, whether written down or merely spoken. Your desperation proves my words are more powerful than your threats. Plato was horrified by the attack. Socrates, however, was resolute. This event marked the end of his secret life. He realized that his philosophy was now too powerful to hide. By dissolving the covert circle and moving entirely to the agora, he forced his enemies to either embrace his challenge openly or retreat. Thrasymachus and his allies, having failed to trap him in a legal net, now turned their focus to manipulating the Athenian public opinion, a far more dangerous game. The historical caricature of Xantippe is that of a nagging, demanding shrew whose constant domestic turmoil tested Socrates' renowned patience. The deep Kyrgyzstal truth revealed in this saga is that Xantippe's famous temper was her life's performance, a meticulously executed form of protective counterintelligence and a personal sacrifice made to shield her husband's mission. Socrates' growing notoriety, his subversive influence on the young, and his poverty made his small house an object of intense surveillance. The wealthy oligarchs and vengeful sophists viewed it as a nest of philosophical treason. Xantippe, acutely intelligent and a master observer of the agora's rumor mill, realized that spies would attempt to infiltrate their home disguised as eager students or household servants. Her strategic goal, to use the commonplace image of domestic chaos to make their home appear too volatile, too unpleasant, and too distracting for serious political plotting. The noise and fury were a deterrent. The moment of truth arrives when Maieutic, one of the eventual accusers, sends his well-connected cousin, a smooth-talking young man named Aeschines, to gain Socrates' trust and gather incriminating evidence. Aeschines sits discreetly in a corner, wax tablet concealed, while Socrates discusses the nature of piety with a small group. Xantippe bursts in, not with just a shout, but with a highly choreographed scene. She carries a heavy laundry basket and begins to berate Socrates about the lack of firewood. As she approaches the spy, she deliberately, violently swings the basket, knocking over Aeschines' chair and exposing his concealed tablet and stylus. Then, for the sake of cover, she unleashes her full fury on Socrates, accusing him of squandering their family fortune on worthless ideas. Xantippe, shrieking, "You think you are so wise, but you cannot even provide dry wood." "Go back to your ridiculous questions and leave me to manage this disaster, and you." She turns on the young spy. "Get out of my house, before my husband teaches you to question your manners as well as your wisdom." Aeschines, thoroughly terrified and convinced the house is a powder keg of domestic insanity, flees. He reports back that Socrates is too preoccupied by a maniacal wife to be a true political threat, a misdirection that ironically protects Socrates. Socrates, calm amid the wreckage, looks at his wife with profound gratitude. "My dear Xantippe," he murmurs, "your fury is a better shield than the walls of the Acropolis. They look at my misfortune and think, a man who cannot rule his own house certainly cannot threaten the state. You have bought us time." Xantippe, tears in her eyes from the exhausting performance, replies, "I am not merely protecting you from death, Socrates. I am protecting you from silence. They must not have the satisfaction of saying you died without fighting for your ideas. You fight with words. I fight with the illusion of weakness." Their domestic arrangement is revealed as a deep covenant, a secret alliance essential to the survival of his philosophical legacy. The short, brutal reign of the 30 tyrants represented the deepest philosophical crisis of Socrates' life. The regime of terror was headed by his brilliant but dangerously ambitious former student, Critias, placing Socrates in direct moral confrontation with the violent consequences of a corrupted intellect. The central adventure involves Socrates' definitive defiance of the regime. He is issued an explicit illegal order: travel to Salamis and forcibly arrest Leon, a wealthy, prominent Democrat, and bring him back for immediate execution and property seizure. The order is delivered by another former student, Charmides, now an officer in the Tyrants' Guard. Socrates refuses. He tells Charmides, "I will not be complicit in injustice. Your order is not the law of Athens, but the tyranny of the unjust." But his defiance does not end there. He realizes Critias needs Leon dead immediately to terrify the remaining opposition. Socrates, acting with unexpected boldness, decides to intercept the execution order itself. He uses his familiarity with Critias's old routines and meets him at a private, heavily secured chamber in the former Bouleuterion council house, where the tyrants are finalizing their kill list. He slips past the first guards, using his eccentric appearance and the guards' general bewilderment. He finds Critias alone, staring at a list of names. Socrates. Critias. Your list grows longer than the list of virtues we once discussed. Is this the justice of the stronger you learned from Thrasymachus? The murder of Leon is not strength, it is the weakness of fear. Critias, enraged and startled, draws his sword. "You old fool! I could have you cut down where you stand. You disobeyed a direct order." Socrates stands his ground, his eyes unblinking. "Then do it, Critias. But know that my execution will cause less trouble than the execution of a popular citizen like Leon. You fear moral authority more than the blade of a Spartan. If you kill me now, you confirm to all of Athens that the only crime you punish is the questioning of your power." Critias hesitates. Killing Socrates, the notorious philosopher, would make him an immediate martyr, potentially sparking the very revolt the tyrants are trying to suppress. Instead, Critias screams an order to Charmides: "Do not bring Leon here. Simply exile him immediately and keep this old man quiet." Socrates has successfully broken the order and saved Leon's life through moral courage and strategic calculation, rather than physical force. The victory is short-lived, however. Charmides, shaken by the encounter, cannot reconcile his loyalty to Critias with the philosophical truth he just witnessed. More importantly, this act of direct, documented defiance of political authority by Socrates is precisely the evidence his democratic accusers will later need to prove his subversion and disrespect for the state. The most public and damaging attack on Socrates' character came from the stage, specifically through Aristophanes' highly popular comedy, The Clouds. The play presented Socrates as a buffoonish, impious, and impoverished sophist, dangling in a basket and teaching young men how to cheat their creditors and disrespect the gods. This theatrical characterization, more than any political speech, poisoned the minds of the Athenian populace against him. The adventure in this act is Socrates' non-traditional intellectual revenge. He decided to fight the comedian with his own weapon by writing a secret counter-satire. Recognizing the potency of humor, Socrates secretly worked with his loyal students, including a sharp-witted young playwright who had been humiliated by Aristophanes. Their goal was to produce a devastating, morally focused satire aimed not at the structure of comedy, but at the corruption and hypocrisy of the established power structure that Aristophanes served. The play, tentatively titled the conscience of the city, was written in haste and rehearsed in hidden quarters. The challenge was staging it. Direct competition was impossible. Instead, the group decided to perform the satire in a private, high-profile setting, a clandestine, exclusive gathering of wealthy Athenians known for their philosophical skepticism. The climax arrives at a lavish, secretive symposium. Midway through the drunken feast, Socrates and his students appear. The play is mercilessly pointed. Socrates, appearing as an orator who is forced to question himself, begins his performance. "I am accused of dangling in the clouds, yet I stand here tonight among the true clouds, the fog of luxury, the vapor of unchallenged greed, and the smoke of false piety. Aristophanes says, 'I disrespect your gods.' But I ask, does not a rich man's prayer to Hermes to hide his cheating also disrespect the gods? I teach your sons to question their fathers, because the gold in your vaults is less valuable than the virtue in their souls." The speech is electrifying and devastating. Aristophanes' political backers in the audience are furious. They attempt to shut down the symposium, claiming impiety. However, the crowd, captivated by the raw truth and the audacity of the stunt, protects Socrates. While the play never reached the public theater, the story of Socrates' brilliant counterattack spread like wildfire among the elite. It showed that he was neither the fool nor the simple criminal portrayed on stage, but a dangerous, highly effective warrior of the intellect. This victory, however, intensified the conspiracy against him. Meletus, Anytus, and Lycon realized that public opinion could no longer be trusted to condemn Socrates. The battle had to move from the stage of comedy to the court of law. For Socrates, the ultimate tragedy was the betrayal of his philosophical ideals by his two most promising yet deeply flawed students, Alcibiades and Critias. Alcibiades, the dazzling but reckless politician, defected to Athens' enemy, Sparta, during a critical time. Critias, the intellectual heavyweight, became the murderous leader of the 30 tyrants. The city, traumatized by war and tyranny, sought a scapegoat, and that scapegoat was the teacher who bred traitors. The emotional climax of this act is Socrates' final, desperate attempt to save his students from their own corrupted paths, and his ultimate realization that their fate is his own. The narrative places Socrates at the house of Alcibiades just hours before his famous defection. Socrates finds Alcibiades packing gold and preparing a hasty retreat. The dialogue is tense, a final philosophical confrontation. Socrates: "Alcibiades, is this flight a simple act of cowardice or the final act of injustice? You abandon the city you claim to love, believing your genius is greater than the law that protects it." Alcibiades, angrily: "My genius is greater than the law, Socrates. You taught me that a law is only as good as the mind that makes it. Athens is corrupted by fools. I will use my mind to force Athens to become what it should be. I am acting on your premise of superior knowledge." Socrates, his heart heavy, realizes his questioning method has been twisted into a justification for unlimited ambition without moral constraint. The failure is not in the philosophy, but in the student's choice. Later, with the Critias regime in power, Socrates defies the execution order, Act 6. This bravery confirms his loyalty to law, but the association with the two traitors is indelible. In the days leading up to his trial, Socrates is approached by his most loyal friends, Crito and Phaedo, with detailed plans for his escape, funded by wealthy patrons. They argue that he must live to protect his legacy from the traitor's stain. Socrates firmly: "My friends, my mission is the examination of life." If I escape now, I will be living a life that is unexamined by the law. I will teach the youth that the law should be obeyed only when it serves their self-interest. The wicked acts of Critias and Alcibiades must not force me into a wicked act of my own. I choose to be judged by the laws I have always defended. The trial will be my final, unshakable lecture. Socrates enters the courthouse not with fear, but with a deep, sorrowful resignation. He knows that his accusers will not be attacking him, but the ghosts of the city's shame, the ghosts of his traitorous students. The courtroom, packed with the 500-man jury and spectators, was less a place of justice than an arena of collective trauma. Socrates faced the charges, impiety, and corruption of the young. The true case, however, was about the failure of Athenian democracy and the need for a scapegoat. The dramatic core of this act is the internal struggle of the jury, personified by a fictional character. Theron, a respected but politically timid older citizen who fought alongside Socrates at Potidaea. Theron's single vote represents the fragile balance of the entire trial. Socrates begins his famous Apologia, defense, not with an appeal for mercy, but with an uncompromising statement of his life's mission. He uses his sharpest Socratic irony, dissecting the claims of his accusers, Meletus, Anytus, and Lycon, and showing they had no personal knowledge of his alleged crimes. Socrates: I am not wicked because I teach new things. I am wicked because I have shown you that your certainties are based on ignorance. Do you prefer to live a life that is so fragile that it cannot withstand a simple question? During the defense, Socrates' eyes meet Theron's. In that moment, a powerful silent communion takes place. Socrates' gaze forces Theron to recall the time Socrates saved his life on the battlefield. The message is clear. Theron, save your city's justice, not my life. The jury votes guilty by a narrow margin, 280 to 220. Theron voted with the majority, terrified of being labeled an impious sympathizer in the politically charged climate. During the penalty phase, the prosecution demands death. Socrates is asked to propose a counter-penalty. This is his final masterstroke of philosophical teaching. Instead of prison or a fine, he proposes he be honored with free meals at the state's expense, the highest civic reward. This intentional, principled act of contempt for the jury's prejudice is devastating. Theron, horrified by Socrates' seeming arrogance, finally breaks. He sees the philosopher as willfully inviting his own death. In the second vote for the penalty, Theron, motivated by anger and confusion, switches his vote to death. The final penalty is sealed. Socrates' expression remains calm. He has achieved his goal. The trial was not a failure, but a success of demonstration. He proved that a life dedicated to truth would always be condemned by a democracy ruled by passion and fear. His final words in the court are a testament to his belief in the immortality of the soul, turning the execution into a mere inconvenience. The final act takes place in the prison cell, where Socrates awaits the return of the sacred ship from Delos, which will signal his execution. His devoted student Crito has perfected the escape plan: a hefty bribe, a secured tunnel, and a fast ship ready to take Socrates to exile in Thessaly. The dramatic climax is the final, profound dialogue on the morning of his death, the most critical of his life. Crito pleads, "Socrates, the ship is here. The guards are paid. You must come with us. To die now is to abandon your children and surrender to your enemies. It is a betrayal of life." Socrates, calm and alert, stops Crito.
At that moment, Lycon, the former spy and now the executioner, enters the cell to prepare the hemlock, standing silently as a witness to the philosopher's final choice. Socrates, to Crito, his voice a final lecture, "We have taught that justice is the greatest good. If the state has judged me, I must abide by that judgment. To escape is to choose injustice over the law, to choose self-interest over civic duty. I will not make my life's teaching a lie in my final hour. I owe more to the laws of Athens than to the fleeting opinion of the people." He asks Lycon to prepare the poison. Lycon, shaking, hands him the cup. Socrates takes it, examines it, and drinks it without hesitation. As the numbness begins to rise from his feet, his mind remains crystal clear. His final words are a famous enigmatic instruction to Crito. "Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius, the god of healing. Pay it, and do not neglect it." This is Socrates' final grand philosophical gesture, viewing death not as a tragedy, but as a cure, a release from the burden of the body and the chaos of the world. He dies as he lived, examining life until the very last breath, transforming his execution into the ultimate affirmation of his philosophy. His physical end marks the true beginning of his immortal legacy, inspiring Plato to write the foundational texts of Western thought. If you enjoyed watching this far, please leave a like right now and let's meet in the comments. I'm curious, what time are you listening to our video and where in the world are you tuning in from? Write it in the comments so we can all see where this huge family is listening from.